Dr. Shaw said, Dave, can I ask you a question first? And I said, Stanley, go right ahead. So Stanley, take it away.
That's great. Thank you, Leslie, for the invitation, and Dave for the chance to chat today. We've heard a lot about obstacles and barriers and frustrations, and so we're in this phase where we have this Gordian knot of problems, and people in this room are kind of finding the ends and untying it, and you're kind of advocating just whacking it with a sword, right? Which is exciting. But so if we look at AliveCor, so I'm a basic scientist by training. So AliveCor is kind of like, the crystal structure of hemoglobin. We know a lot about it, and we thought surely this is going to lead to great advances because rich base of knowledge, right? So you guys have actually clinical evidence and published studies of how this information can be used. You have an FDA-approved device and an app. You're a mature company in technology, and many people in this room can probably share anecdotes about how they or their family or their patients have used it. So I'll ask you to maybe start with your rose-colored glasses and say, on your best days, what do you think of as the exciting opportunities? And then, what do you still perceive as the obstacles to wider adoption? And you're welcome to use your personal experiences from AliveCor, but to speak more generally as well.
Well, thank you, Stanley. By the way, thanks, Leslie, for inviting us up here to talk about this, because Leslie was a pioneer with me a number of years ago, and we first 50 users of AliveCor were at this meeting, and we learned an awful lot. And now literally hundreds of thousands of people later, we're still learning, Stanley. What I will tell you is, we have over 60 peer-reviewed journal articles and abstracts with AliveCor. So we have tons of clinical validation and a variety of clinical applications. But those same barriers and issues you heard this morning deal with every day. We're a self-pay. Everybody, the large numbers of people who use AliveCor have bought the device themselves. And by and large, the physicians who then interact and use that data don't get paid. So I just violated two of the premises of medical technology, a business I've been in for 30 years when I left academic medicine, and that is patients aren't going to pay, and doctors aren't going to do it if they don't get paid. No, that's not true. So whether it's at Mass General or at Cleveland Clinic or at USC, they will, but it's slow, and it's the path to where the puck is an unknown distance. And so I think what we hope to do is continue to prove our clinical value, and that ultimately all the regulatory and governmental and private pay mechanisms will align to make it economically valuable, not just clinically valuable. We've proven the clinical value. Now we have, as everyone says, what's the monetary strategy? Well, you can buy our device for $100 on Amazon, but beyond that, what's the money? And I can tell you, we're pioneers, and the pioneer means that we're running experiments. Like you, I come from a science background, we run experiments. I can't tell you today which experiment will succeed. What I can tell you is we're running a number in parallel. So with organizations like Partners, we're running experiments. With organizations like large pharmaceutical medical device companies, we're running experiments. With provider organizations like the NHS, we're running experiments. And I think 5 years from now, we'll have a much better idea. We just need to make sure we get there.
So as you approach these institutions and work with them, do you find that they're coming around, that they see the ability to improve either the quality of care, lower the costs or improve the patient experience? Do you sense that they're kind of getting organized, or is it still a lot of pilots, a lot of balkanization?
Well, every major healthcare organization has a digital health enterprise within them, okay? Many of them are running pilots. We have the benefit of we've been proven. We've done, today, AliveCor will record tens of thousands of ECGs into our cloud. Tens of thousands today. And so I don't have to really prove to someone that it's valuable from a clinical perspective. I've got to prove to them that it can be integrated into their practice of medicine. And that, when you've got billing and you've got EMRs and you've got all these other extraneous things, it partners. You're an Epic shop, more than 2 or 3 of those. And we have an Epic data sharing problem in healthcare. And I would say it's not just them, it's everyone. It is difficult. And everybody wants to have their competitive advantage, when what we need is interoperability, data sharing. And those are challenges. We at AliveCor look at our data as a very valuable resource, but it's like a mine that hasn't been mined yet, right? We haven't turned the ore into jewelry. And that's going to be a process. But I will tell you, slowly but surely, whether it's the Kaiser Permanentes or the NHSs, or whether it's the Cedars-Sinai's and Cleveland Clinics, kind of the opposite ends of our healthcare systems, capitated to fee-for-service, they're all engaged, thankfully, with AliveCor, to figure out how to solve clinical problems and integrate into the practice of medicine. And so we just have to be patient. It's not an overnight phenomenon, Stanley.
Dave, I have to ask you something, because I'm a traditional doctor. I've done tons of research with your device. You've done all the hard work many startups don't do, evidence-based, validation, FDA, but you also have a consumer product. We gave your product to 1,300 consumers who used it all the time, but you don't have an app. You don't have a consumer experience. If people are using your device to figure out how much to exercise or even how much to party or not party, which is some of our data, right? That's valuable, and they want their EKG for that, not just the heart rate data from some other sensor. Why, in all this time, if you guys really want to scale, haven't you have that groovy consumer app on how to interact with your EKG? And Stan, how do you feel about your patients being in some other experience, but by the way, they're recording their ECG, which for you, you'll just get a notice if they go into AFib or have ET or heart block or whatever. So Dave, I'm just...
You're asking hard questions, because the one thing a startup has to do, Leslie, is focus. And I will tell you, we're on a journey. And the journey is, are we a consumer company or are we a medical company? 25% of US cardiologists own an AliveCor. I'm really proud of that. But many, many, many more consumers, and you can buy it. The average age of a consumer/patient customer for AliveCor, 61 years old. The biggest decade, 60 to 70. Yeah, we have 25-year-olds and 35-year-olds, but we're principally a patient device to date. Your work is pioneering. I think, we can only focus on one thing because of limited resources, and I guess it's the bias I come from. I want to help sick people. Yeah, I'd love to keep healthy people healthy, but we can only do one thing at a time, and I think that's the reason why we haven't focused on consumer applications, because half of the people who buy an AliveCor, their cardiologist tells them to buy it. And I can tell you, chief medical officers of the largest medical device firms in the world come up to me and say, Dave, I bought a device for my parents. Fantastic. The head of VP from the most prestigious, biggest brand in medicine, I bought one of your devices for my parents. So we're focused on medicine today, Leslie. That doesn't mean that there's not a consumer wellness opportunity, but we're band limited.
Well, what's the Google guy saying?
Well,
Your CEO.
He's focused. We've got to be a successful company in one area before we can move to other people. I mean, yeah, I have a whole management team of very smart ex-Google people, and they obviously understand consumers and things, but they've realized, let's be successful here and then look for adjacent opportunities. And so we're focused on partners, Mayo, Cedars, Kaiser, NHS, because we can go to, we're small, we can go to those places and have a multiplying effect.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is some real currency to that idea of focusing on a specific or narrow use case and a specific audience and then going broad. I think that's a paradigm that you can find analogies for even in some of the ways pharmaceutical companies are developing drugs, right? Look for maybe a rare disease population and then expand to a broader chronic disease population where the same pathways are implicated. And arguably, Jonathan Bush draws the analogy of, so he's the CEO of Athena Health, he draws the analogy of, Uber Black got people thinking, and then Uber X kind of could follow once you had proven it for a more of a niche market. One thing that David mentioned that is interesting is just this notion of interoperability. And I think if you look across all of the healthcare stakeholders, we've been talking a lot about patient care, but I think there's great interest in the use of these sensors in fundamental biomedical discovery, as Jessica alluded to, and also pharmaceutical and biotech companies. And Jessica was very modest, or if she mentioned this, I missed it. But in 2011, the National Academy of Sciences, when they were talking about reimagining a taxonomy of medicine, used the analogy of Google Maps, right? And so you have multiple data sets collected by different organizations, but they're all keyed by this geographic tag. And that allows you to integrate data at multiple scales, right? So you can go from Google Earth all the way down to a photograph of the bagel shop. And you can look at dynamic information now, like traffic. Right? And I think that's actually a pretty useful way to think about what could be a very powerful goal that can serve multiple stakeholders in medicine as well, right? If you start with the genetics and the epigenetics and the microbiome, and then you start moving up through wearable sensors and measuring things, not just in doctors' offices, but in the wild when people are at work or relaxing, and then up to ways maybe through apps to capture behavior and social connectivity. That would be a very powerful stack to have. It's, in some public health studies, like the Framingham Heart Studies of the world, or the TIMI groups, and they have done this with, I'll call it traditional data. And so we have an opportunity and a challenge to do that same kind of integration of data at multiple scales, but incorporating non-traditional medical data. And I think that's very exciting. As I can tell, it's happening in pilots, right? That seems to be the theme of a lot of this.
So if the NBA is selecting players for success on the basis of Twitter feeds, should we be trying to figure out which of our patients will comply to drugs on the basis of things like, why wouldn't we want to do that quicker rather than, I understand the focus, I understand the need to show this stuff works, that it's valid data if you're going to act on it, all that just basic stuff. But at a certain point, you're on the phone, Dave. There's a lot you could capture potentially for, patient behavior. And I just wonder.
You're absolutely right, Leslie. There is a lot more data we could capture. I mean, we tie into your Apple Health and your Google Fit data if you allow us. We can record your voice and extract not only the text information, there's an awful lot more pictures of how you look and the kinds of tools that deep learning at places like Google and Microsoft are extracting. I would tell you there's no limit to the opportunities to improve health. Health is old. We, like meals. Traditionally, you have breakfast, lunch at a time, dinner at a time. That's not when you need to eat, that's when you schedule to eat. You know, my wife is a rheumatologist. She schedules a patient back in 6 months. That's not when the patient needs to be seen. That's when she fills a slot in her calendar. We need to move medicine and diet to when it's needed, when it's appropriate. And that's going to require a whole new, that's where digital health comes in. Making the access to care when you need it, not when it's scheduled. And I'm hopeful that we, as my little company, can be a part of that, but it's going to take everybody to change healthcare because, by the way, Sutton's Law, because money, you know, the late Senator Dale Bumpers, when they tell you it's not about the money, it's all about the money. And that's what's driving everything today, money. And so we've got to figure out the money mechanics, whether it's at Partners and how it fits. And by the way, both Framingham Hart and Timmy are AliveCor users. Thank you. So, you know, we have to figure these things out. And it's going to be a journey, ladies and gentlemen. We're not going to know the answer tomorrow. We're going to know it in those 5 and 10 years. And hopefully some of us have chosen correctly behind door number 2. But we'll find out.
Let's thank Dr. Stanley Shaw and Dr. David Albert.